Gonna need that extra strong coffee to get through this episode. Not that talking about badminton is difficult, nor that was I bored watching the tournament. It's been an incredibly long month of October with 4 consecutive BWF World Tour events of Super 500 and above. Is that a good thing? Is it not? Is the scheduling too tough? Do they need to change that? I'll get to that in a second, but first, welcome to this episode of Beckman's Breakdown, the show where I take a look at all of the BWF World Tour events from Super 500 up to Super 1000, including the majors and the team events. Like I said, this was the 4th consecutive tournament of 500 and above. We had the Arctic Open at the beginning of October. That was a Super 500. Then we had the Denmark Open Super 750, the French Open Super 750, and then this past week, we had the Hylo Open Super 500. It was actually upgraded to a 500 for the first time this year. Historically, since the World Tour began and since the Hylo, I think it's gone through a couple of name changes. I remember playing this tournament when it was called the Bitburger Open. That shows my age a little bit. But yeah, no, it was a 300, got upgraded to a 500. But anyway, like I said, this may have been the 4th week of competition. And as a result, we didn't see many of the top players play. A number of the disciplines, their top seeds were either just inside the top 10 or outside the top 10. That goes to show the kind of level. It was slightly weaker, but that's not to say that I'm trying to cheapen or taking away from any of the players that did well, nor am I trying to say that there's not much for me to talk about, because there's actually plenty of things that I want to talk about. But before I get into any of that, of course, you know it's coming. Beckman's Breakdown merchandise. If you want to buy any of it, then click the link in the description below. If you do, not only do I think you're going to get some pretty cool and comfortable pieces of clothing to wear, you will also be supporting the channel, both obviously monetary, but visually as well, because people are going to go, hey, what's that? What's this from? And you can tell them about this amazing badminton channel on YouTube. But yeah, no, if you want any of the stuff, I think there's still maybe 1 or 2 pieces that have the 20% discount, but there's free worldwide shipping. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, shipping is free, and that will continue as long as I'm in somewhat control over my own merchandise. So yeah, with the shameless plug out of the way, let's get to it, starting with the first elephant in the room, because there's actually 2 for this tournament, and that of course is the scheduling of the BWF World Tour. So yes, the scheduling of the BWF World Tour, it's been something that's been an issue, especially in recent years, especially since I wouldn't say necessarily since the World Tour began, because that obviously the World Tour started in 2018. It's been, I would say, since lockdown came out. Obviously, if you all remember back, all you badminton fans, when tournaments started to come back kind of semi-regularly after the Tokyo Olympics in the summer of 2021, there was that period from the Olympics up to Christmas that was just absolutely mental. You had like the Sudirman Cup, Thomas Cup, you had a number of other events in Europe, then you had like the Bali bubble, then you had the World Tour Finals, then you even finished the year with the World Championships. It was a really crazy schedule that left a number of players obviously fatigued, exhausted, and unfortunately we also saw some injuries from that. And I think since then the scheduling has got a little bit busier, and it's something that players talk about, but fans do obviously always bring up. And I think it more around, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong with this one, but maybe it's not so much around the overall number of tournaments. I guess that it kind of go hand in hand, but it's more where certain tournaments are placed. I know I've definitely had issue with this, where sometimes you have like a Super 1000, which is supposed to be like the biggest events of the year, and sometimes they can either be right at the start of like 3 or 4 weeks of competition, or in the middle, or sometimes even at the end. And it just feels like if the Super 1000s, I know we haven't had any of those in this European leg, but still, if they're supposed to be the top tier of tournaments, then obviously you've got to be mindful of the tournaments around it, because obviously you also want those to be well attended, you want those to be of a good level, and obviously if players are playing say 3 or 4 weeks consecutively, then things can get a little bit tough. I think also part of the scheduling is sometimes the order of the tournaments. I know that's definitely been an issue with the tournaments in January. I think it's the Malaysia Open, the Indonesia Masters, and the India Open. I think there's too much back and forth. It would make more sense for players to be able to travel kind of in order, whereas I think at that start you go to Malaysia, then you go to India, then you come back to Indonesia. It kind of makes no sense. It's a lot of travel. Obviously, with this European leg, it's 4 weeks back to back, which is incredibly tough, but at least the travel time is short. I mean, Finland to Denmark is literally next door. Denmark to France is also very short. And then obviously Germany is just a little hop over. There really isn't too much travel time around these things. But that doesn't get away from the fact that obviously 4 consecutive weeks of Super 500 and above is a little bit too much. The big question I already mentioned that we've didn't see many of the top players playing the Hylo Open. Now that's historically always been the case because it's been a Super 300. It usually does follow from the Denmark Open and the French Open, which are the two key tournaments within this kind of autumn, October kind of European leg. But obviously being a 500, you're expecting maybe a slightly higher level. It was a little bit low. And maybe that is something to do with the scheduling, because if it's the 4th tournament in a row, not many of the top players are going to play all of that. They might have played the Arctic. We did see a few a bit better attended. If we compare those two tournaments, the Arctic was better attended, and I think that's because some players might have felt they wanted a week of competition before the 750s. The 750s came the week after. Whether that's because they're traveling for Asia, they want to kind of get used to the different climate. Obviously, the time zone changes. They want a bit of competition under their belt before they go into, obviously, the bigger tournaments. Obviously, after the fact, that's not so much of an issue. That's why, again, we haven't seen any of the China team, Korean team, or I don't think any of the Japanese team. Maybe we feel like more the independent, like Nishimoto might have played, but not many of the top, like the national team players for Japan playing in the Hylo Open. And even from Indonesia, we saw that was probably the top team that entered, obviously Denmark as well. But again, we didn't see all of them. So even from Denmark, we didn't see Antonsen or Victor Axelsen play. What I'm trying to get at, I guess, is the question I initially have, and I've been thinking about this all week, is does this cheapen the Super 500 level? Because it's always spoken about that the Super 500 is the equivalent to a Super Series. And the Super Series, if you can remember, before the World Tour, it was the Super Series era. The Super Series, and then you had Super Series Premier, they were like the top tier tournaments. I know there weren't as many, well, I guess there were as many levels, but it wasn't as under the same banner. But anyway, Super Series was, if you won one, it was a huge deal. You know, to win a Super Series tournament was massive. And then does having an equivalent tournament of the Hylo, again, I'm not trying to take away from players that won in Hylo or that did well, that usually we wouldn't see at this tournament, but does that take away a little bit from that? So that was kind of my initial thoughts. And I was thinking about this more and more throughout the week. But then I kind of was thinking about it from this point of view, is that maybe, although they are the equivalent, we always hear Jill Clark say the Super 500 is the equivalent of the Super Series. But maybe we should kind of, I know they're the same tournament. So like if you go back in history, a Super 500, most of them were, obviously the Hylo wasn't, but most of them were Super Series. But now we've got obviously 750 and 1000s. We've got 2 levels above the Super 500. Whereas in the Super Series, there's only 1 level above, and that was Super Series Premier, and there are only a handful of those. And those are the tournaments that are now your Super 1000s. So if you think of it through that way, maybe the 750s are basically equivalent to your Super Series, and you obviously 1000s are the Super Series Premiers. That does mean overall there's slightly less, but maybe if we look at the 500s through a slightly lower light, looking at them as a Grand Prix Gold, maybe you could blur them. So Grand Prix Gold / Super Series, then I guess maybe it doesn't necessarily cheapen the Super 500 in that way. You'd also got to look at it that having more tournaments does offer more opportunities for, say, the players that we did see at this Hylo Open do it better, getting to the semis, getting to the final, even winning the tournament, that wouldn't really do that well or win those kind of tournaments or get to the semis of, say, I guess you call a better attended or a usually attended 500, or obviously the Super 750s and the Super 1000s. So obviously you're going to give those players more opportunities, because I know that's been a bit of a problem. I've spoken to a few players within the singles sphere that are in that kind of, they're not quite high enough rank to get into, say, a Super 1000 or a 750 because there's no qualifying for them. But they are capable of kind of competing with some of the lower level ones. So maybe having more tournaments of a Super 500 where they can get in, they can do well, offers them more opportunities to rise through the rankings and maybe get into a position where they can kind of make the top tier of tournaments. I think we should look at it, I mean, the way I was looking at it, and you can always obviously let me know your own thoughts, is if we look at the 500s as something that we shouldn't expect to see the top players at too often, then I think the scheduling, it's still got some issues. I still spoke of the January tournaments, the way the order of it is a bit off, and I still think Super 1000 should be on their own, and 2 750s is okay, but sometimes it does spill over. There's still some other issues, but I think when people look at it, like say I've looked at these 4 tournaments and you're like, wow, Super 500. I'm still seeing a Super 500 because I hear the equivalent of Super Series of such a high level of tournament. And some 500s will be really, really strong. For sure, certain, especially like the Arctic Open was a pretty strong 500. But I think if we should lower our expectations and see that the level of the Hylo Open, maybe a bit above that would be what a 500 should be. And then if we look at through that, the scheduling is still busy, but maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing because it offers more opportunities for players to play tournaments, more opportunities for players to earn prize money, to get exposure. Now, obviously, in 2 years' time, we're going to get much more TV coverage of these tournaments. Lots of things. So if we see it from the player's perspective, it's quite a good thing. Now, I know some of you are going to go, but what about the committed players, Ben? Yes, the committed players, I think if you're like top 10 or 15, you have to play all the 1000s, all the 750s, and you have to play 2 500s. And I've criticised that in the past, but now when I think about it, 2 500s, there's 9 in the year. That's not too bad. You're probably going to get top players. There's going to be one for them that's going to be in their country. So Indonesia has one because they had the Indonesia Open and the Indonesia Masters. Malaysia has the Malaysia Masters. Is that a 500? I'm pretty sure it would be a 500, etc. So that, even if it's within their country or it's very close to, or like I said, like the Arctic Open, it's going to be that one before a bigger tournament. So players are likely, top players might play it as a kind of warm-up event. You know, we look at, I know it's not a 500, but the German Open before the All England, quite a lot of players do travel to that because they want a week competition before they go to the All England. So I'm not sure if I'm going round in circles here, but I initially, when I was thinking of these tournaments, I was like, Jesus, 4 tournaments of Super 500, super in my mind, again, Super Series. That's a really crazy schedule. Badminton fatigue, etc., etc. But then when I thought about it as opportunities for players and that 500s maybe shouldn't be seen in such a highlight, that maybe it's more opportunities for the kind of players that I'm going to talk about a little later in this video. And like I said, with committed players, they don't have to play 2 of the 9 500s. And I think within their year, that's not too bad. I also think, and I've said this before, is that I think it's going to come down to, yes, I said, scheduling, there's definitely some things that can be improved upon. And I'd love to hear your own thoughts on that. But I think a lot of it, we need to also look at the players and the coaching teams, especially, and how they plan out the year. If I use one relatively good example, although maybe not so in from what I've recently heard, but Alex Lanier, he's young, obviously been doing really well. He's in the top 10 in the world in the men's singles. But he's been very selective with his tournaments. There's been certain tournaments I'm like, why isn't he playing? Because he's young, if you consider like the Popovs, they were going around to absolutely every tournament when they were that age, in the 19, 20 years old kind of bracket, trying to gain as much experience. Whereas Lanier's been very selective. I think almost too much, because I think he's actually not playing Australia or Kumamoto, even though he actually, if he played it, he could have a really good chance of qualifying for the World Tour Finals. But maybe they're looking beyond that. They're looking really into the future for his development. So again, maybe it's going to come down to coaching and that stuff. Again, seeing the 500s for what they are and picking very selective ones. We're talking, if you're a top 10 player, you have to play 2. But even if you're not, even if you're a 10 to 20 player and you're just outside that committed bracket, maybe still only playing 1 to 2, not doing a Cho Chien Chen and playing every tournament under the sun. So maybe there's a little bit of onto the players. But again, I don't want to get away from the fact that I do think the scheduling, it's a very busy schedule. But then a lot of sports are busy. If we look at, I don't follow that many other sports, but I know the tennis season is really hard. Basketball, obviously, I know they have an off season, but the on season is incredibly difficult. We're talking like 2 or 3 big games every week. That's obviously really tough. Badminton players don't quite have that. But yeah, no, I think it's going to come down to Beat are definitely going to have to kind of figure a few things out, maybe the order of stuff. Maybe we as fans need to see 500s in a slightly different light, then it would actually make the schedule not look as mental as it does. And then I think the players and the coaches need to really focus more on how they approach. Again, another example is we see the Korean team, An Se-young, Kim Won-ho and Seo Sun-jae. They only played the 750s. They turned up, they did their job, and then they're done. There's no need to play the 500s anymore. I obviously both those are going to have to play too, but they'll probably play like the Korean Open, and they'll probably go. I think they're going to Kumamoto, one of those ones, and the Australian to kind of tick that box because it's not too far for them. So yeah, no. Obviously, before we had seen probably An Se-young play 4, maybe 5 Super 500s. Now she's going to play the bare minimum of 2, and that's obviously a good thing. So again, I would end this by just saying I'd love to hear your thoughts on the schedule. I know it's crazy, but maybe we can see it through the light. Like I said, I'm repeating myself a few times here, but of opportunities for players. We can't just see it through the lens of the very, very best. There's obviously a whole tier of systems to this, to badminton, and maybe we should lower our thoughts on what a Super 500 actually is. No. Let me know your thoughts, guys. I'm going to move on because, like I said, next thing I want to talking about this scheduling and how this Hylo Open, it's a 500. It's obviously still got some big level to it. Obviously, with not so many players entering, it did offer some big chances for some smaller players. Yeah, like I just said, obviously we had some big chances for smaller players. Lower ranked players is probably a better way to put it, Ben. Let me have another quick sip of my coffee. So I'm not going to talk about everyone in detail because otherwise I'd be here for absolutely ever. But obviously a big one is we saw Margot Lambert and Camille Pognante of France winning the women's doubles. They're 33 in the world. And so obviously a fantastic result for them. That's going to help probably push them up into the top 30, and then that should mean they can get into some of the bigger events, which is really good for European badminton. Their opponents are 18 in the world, Su Yinhui and Lee Ji-yun. That's obviously a good result for them as well. That's going to help them. Like I said, I'll talk more about the French pair a bit later in this video because someone did actually ask a pretty good question about them. Like I said, I don't want to make this section crazy long, talking about detail about every single one. In the women's singles, Unnati Hooda, the 18-year-old from India, she emulated Anmol Khan's achievement from the Arctic Open, where she reached her first semi-final of a tournament at this level. So Unnati did the same. She's currently 34 in the world, so she's right on the cusp of being high enough ranked to get into some of the bigger tournaments. I know she has played in Super 1000s. In fact, at the China Open earlier this year, which is the Super 1000, she reached the quarterfinals, an absolutely incredible result. And she's also reached the semi-finals of a Super 300 this year. So for a player who played the World Juniors recently, she reached the quarterfinals. I know there's been a lot of talk. I've heard Unnati's name over the last 4 or 5 years. I think she won a tournament, obviously at the lower level, but when she was like 14, 15 years old. So she's been someone that Indian fans have been talking about for a long time. But India have a number of good players. Obviously Anmol Khan. And then we had, what's her name? I can't quite remember her name. Tashvi, is it Tashvi? Oh, well, I should have written this down. I was watching actually her match yesterday from the World Juniors. She reached the final. So they got lots and lots of talented players. For me, I'll talk about Unnati Hooda, is she reached semi-finals and was beaten pretty convincingly by the top seed, Putri Kusuma Wardani of Indonesia. And that match kind of highlighted where I think she needs to improve, and that's in her defensive skills and also being able to turn defense into attack. Unnati, like a number of the other Indian players that I've seen, very, very skillful, bit unorthodox, but when on the front foot, when above the shuttle, when in a good attacking position, has very nice sharp kind of skills and can do a lot of damage and can obviously win points against the very best in the world. But when they're put on the defensive, their footwork is a little bit Like with Anati, I think she takes 1 or 2 extra steps when she doesn't need to, so she needs to smooth that out. I don't think she's going to be like a smooth mover like Si-young or Yamaguchi or Chen Yufei, but she can certainly work on that. Obviously, she's only 18, so there's plenty of there's like a physical element to that as well. But the big thing is the defense, because I feel like her defense is a little bit weak, both to the smashing, the slicing, and basically the twisting and turning. As a result, it's not just getting the shuttle back, but I felt that when she was put on the back foot, this was against Wardani, she struggled to get it back because of her defensive footwork, but also I think her defensive skills in general, her ability to play quality, and even when you're slightly late on the shuttle, still have your opponent a little bit late or a little bit unsure of what's happening next. I feel that she can do that from an attacking position, which obviously is easier, but from a defensive one, I think that's a big, big area that her and a number. I said the same thing about Anmol Karb, and I do agree. And from what I watch of the World Juniors, the same goes for the girl that went all the way to the final. Again, I do apologise that I can't remember her name. I'm sure there'll be people in the comments jumping to tell me. But yeah, no, I think that's a common theme amongst Indian players, that their defence isn't as good as their attack. And I think that whilst that would probably always be the case, there's definitely a huge amount of room for improvement for players like Unati Huda. We saw Spain have a pair reach the semi-finals of the mixed doubles. That's Ruben Garcia and Lucia Rodriguez. They're 49 in the world, both 21 years old, so very young. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about, when it comes to Europe, about how France have really produced a number of players, and, you know, we saw that again here this week in Hylo. Obviously, Spain, off the back of Carolina Marin's success, there was a period where it looked like they were starting to produce some really good juniors. That's somewhat faded, but clearly there's still some real talent coming out of Spain. And these two, they're in their semi-final against Mathias Christiansen and Alexandra Boje, the pair who won the title. Obviously, that's a step too far for them at the moment, but very skillful. I like the fast lefty guy, Ruben, very, very good. And the girl does the basics well. They're a very good European pair, and I'd like to see more of them in the future. You know, you're not quite sure how they're going to develop, what the setup is like, all that kind of stuff, but they could be a pair that if they stick with it, we could see them get decent results. And especially at the European level, maybe they could bring a medal for Spain outside of the women's singles. Another pair in the women's doubles actually was Bengisu. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Any Turkish followers can definitely help me with this one. Bengisu Ersitin and Nazlıkan İnci of Turkey. They reached the semi-finals of the women's doubles, losing to the Chinese Taipei pair who reached the final. So very, very good. And then finally, this is where I kind of want to follow on in a little more detail, because it's the men's singles, something I know a little bit more about than the other disciplines, but also there was just a little bit more to talk about, and there was a bigger story out of that. So in the men's singles, we saw 2 Danes do well. Ditlev Jägerholm reached the quarterfinals, and obviously Magnus Johannesson reached the final. The reason I've put those two together, I will come back to Magnus in the next section, actually, because obviously I want to talk about Jonathan Christie, and obviously Magnus played Jonathan in the final. But why I'm lumping these two together is because not only is it good for Danish badminton that they, obviously their setup has gone through a number of changes. Obviously Kenneth Jonassen leaving, Hans Christian Witting who's taking over. Obviously, I know this is not recent news, but obviously their top 2 players for Denmark, Victor Axel and Anders Antonsen, are no longer part of the national team. So there's been these question marks over, does Denmark have any more talent to come through? And these 2 players, although they're not young, they're still young enough. And obviously results like this are really positive for their future. But the other reason I want to bring up is because I know both of them. I actually know Ditlev pretty well because he lived in Surrey, where I'm from, for a long time, especially throughout all his junior days. He moved back to Denmark, I think, after he'd finished school, and obviously has gone on to bigger and better things. But both of them have, I know over the last year or so, suffered quite severe injuries. So this is quite a good sign for them of their comeback. 2 very different players, although they're both left-handed, 2 very different styles. Obviously, Ditlev being very tall and slim, and Magnus being slightly of a shorter stature. Like I said, I will come back to Magnus Johannesson a little bit later in this video. But the last one The one that kind of made a big name was the 31-year-old from Finland, Kalle Koljonen, of Finland. He's 55 in the world, and he reached the semi-finals. Now, the reason why he made more of a splash is in the first round, he beat Cho Chien Chen. Then, I can't remember who he beat in the round after that. I think it was Nat Nguyen of Ireland, another player that's been quite regular on the higher level of World Tour tournaments. And then in the quarterfinal, he beat Ayush Shetty, a very talented young player from India who's been doing very, very well. Did he win in Canada? He's definitely, I think he's won a World Tour Super 300 event this year, I'm pretty sure, and done well in others. And then obviously, eventually, he did lose out to Magnus Johannesson. Now, that does raise a question, is how is he able to beat... Let's take Nat Nguyen slightly out of the equation. How is he able to beat Cho Chien Chen and Ayush Shetty? Two very high-ranked players, two players that, obviously, you look at Cho Chien Chen, won the Arctic Open, the Super 500 at the beginning of this tour, and Ayush Shetty, like I said, has won another tournament and is kind of rising through the ranks. So how did someone who's ranked 55 in the world, who hasn't really shown like any amazing results over the last year or so, anything that jumps to my mind. I know who Kalle is. I've actually spoken to him a few times about certain things. In fact, I mentioned that one of the people that I spoke to about the scheduling and chances for lower ranked players to get their ranking up, etc. Calle's quite vocal about all that. I have spoken to him a few times. But how did he produce those wins? Now, for me, let's start with Cho Chien Chen. I think obviously a big factor is Cho Chien Chen was one of the only players who played all 4 tournaments on this tour. So I think his exploits at the Arctic Open did carry over. Although I don't think we can weigh up too much to fatigue, because he obviously won an Arctic Open. We know how tough that was. We all saw the pictures of his blisters. I mentioned those. Then I think, was it in Denmark, he lost first round to Victor. And then in France, it was either first, second round to Victor again. So although he's done a lot of travelling, you could argue that by the time you get to Hylo, he should have not been as fatigued. It's not like he reached the latter stages of 2 of those 3 previous tournaments. It was only for 1. So I'm not sure we could fully chalk it up to fatigue, although I would say that he did look a little bit weary on court when he was playing Kalle. Now, I think the reason Kalle won, and this moves over into his win over Ayush Shetty, although there's some slightly different reasoning that I'll get to about Shetty, is that I thought Koljonen's intensity was really, really good, and he absolutely dominated the front of the court. He was so quick onto the net. I can't remember how many times, I lost count how many times he would play a net shot, and on the next one, if they played net to the back, he jumped on and he killed it off, or he was trying to push it really, really fast. He was really making a big push to when he got to that net, that he was going to not allow them to kind of play net back. He was going to try and jump on there, or he was going to try and be quick on it to kind of keep the intensity in the rally. So every time Cho or Ayush as well played back to the net, they didn't have like a time to like settle. Like their quality had to be absolutely amazing to be able to do that. So I think Kalle did a really good job of kind of winning the net. I think he also did a good job. He's quite an awkward player as well. And I think he was also, having a really good tournament. And so things were coming off for him. And he looks like someone, I never played him, but he looks like someone who's, if it is working, it would be quite difficult because it's a little bit, unorthodox is probably the wrong word, but it would probably just come off his racket at a slightly weird angle. And obviously players like Cho and Ayush probably haven't really seen much of him or played much of him, so it probably would have been a bit of a surprise. But the level of intensity that he brought was really, really high. His front court and mid court forward was really, really good. And especially against Ayush Shetty, he utilised he would cross smash and then he'd cross smash again. So a lot of twisting and turning, which I think is something that Ayush Shetty especially needs to get a little better at. So I think with that intensity, he took advantage of maybe a slightly wearier Cho Chien Chen. And I think against Ayush Shetty, he took advantage of Ayush Shetty, who's probably, I think, for me, when I was watching that game, it wasn't really there in the first. Ayush looked quite in control. And then the second, it did seem like he kind of took his foot off the pedal. He probably thought he was going to win it a little bit easier. Or he maybe thought that Kalle was going to roll over or things were going to go his way because he won a relatively comfortable first. That didn't happen. In fact, Kalle came back even stronger. And then I think you could see a nervous kind of Ayush Shetty. It's not, don't know how to explain this, but if you're kind of the favourite sometimes and your opponent is playing well and is a little bit tricky to read, and he's jumping on things and he's unsettling you with the way that he plays, which I think Calais does really, really well. It can sometimes make you just feel a little bit like, oh, like things just don't feel good. You feel a little bit tense inside. You might be a bit short of breath, or your shots start to go. Your quality is just a little bit not there. You're a little bit tentative on certain shots. I could definitely see that in Ayachetti. I'm sure any player who's played to a good level, played competitively like I did, I could see it in him. I don't quite know how to put it into words. It is nerves. It is kind of like, I should be winning this, but my opponent's playing really well, and I'm like, why isn't it working? Why isn't this? And it can just kind of snowball. And I kind of saw that from Ayachetti. It did seem in the third, because Calais got a bit of a lead, when Ayash was coming back, I think it was 16-12 down, and he got to like 17-16 up. I thought, oh, maybe he's kind of got through that, and now he can run away and win. But then fair play to Calais, who kind of held it back. I think nerves and stuff did play a part, but obviously that's not to say that it wasn't anything to do with the way that Calais made Ayash feel that way. I think it was a little bit of a combination of Ayash did it to himself a little bit by being a bit too casual in that second game, and then combine that with the way that Calais was playing. It added to that, and it really made it kind of created that melting pot. One thing I was a little bit unsure of, I'm a little bit confused by, but maybe this does play into the fact that Ayash wasn't feeling particularly comfortable. He was feeling a bit tense. Was that one area where Ayash was winning a lot of points was smashing down Calais' backhand side. And so it was interesting, on the final point, there was a chance for Ayash, on his forehand, to just it was relatively short, to lever it down the backhand for a winner, and he went for a drop shot and it went in the net, and that's what lost in the match. And maybe that was a little bit of that tension or whatever, that little bit of doubt, those seeds of doubt. So yeah, I know when I was watching the match, and I've obviously watched on highlights, there's a number of people commenting, and a lot of people were like basically just chalking up to Ayash was like threw it away, or he went too easy, or he underestimated his opponent. I think that's only part of it. I think you've got to obviously give credit to Calais the way that he played. And I think it was a little bit Irish, maybe took his foot off the pedal, combined with Calais, like I said, dominating the net and kind of really showing that intensity and being a little bit unorthodox, combined with the fact that he was just playing very, very well and maintained an incredible pace. And I think those things just created this melting pot for Ayachetti. And it leads on to, so what was the difference? Why was he not able to beat Magnus Johannesson? A player not much, but lower ranked than both Cho and Ayachetti. And actually someone that doesn't have as big an attack as both of those players, so might not be able to expose, like I said, one of Calais' weaknesses is his defence. And for me, what Magnus did really, really well was he won the net. He completely took that away. Not only did he play back to the net with deception, so Calais was a little bit late, so he couldn't play as much control from the front of the court, but also he injected speed. He mixed up how fast he moved to the net as well. Sometimes he would like jump on a net really quick, there and push it. And the next one he'd move there, wait, delay, and then hit it. And so constantly Calais couldn't quite get into a rhythm, whereas I feel like both Cho, obviously, and Ayash are capable of doing that, but they, for whatever reason, they weren't doing it. They were kind of playing the net and the front court almost one pace, lacking a little bit of deception, etc. Whereas Magnus played that front of the court, almost took that area away, won that side of it. And then from there, we saw, obviously, Calais can't really get into as many attacking opportunities. Then I started to see a lot more errors from him, maybe because he's there a little bit later, or he's trying to force it from a slightly worse position. And so I think Magnus did that really well. And I think in his attack as well, he was just very sharp, very clinical. And it was just a really good professional performance by Magnus Johannesson in that semi-final. So obviously, talking of Magnus also leads into the next section. And that is that I want to talk about Jonathan Christie, who won the men's singles. So yeah, Jonathan Christie won the men's singles. Another tournament for him, following on from his win at the Denmark Open. Out of his last 4 tournaments played, he's now won 3 titles: the Korean Open, Denmark Open, and now the Hylo Open. For me, what a fantastic week from him. I want to talk a little bit more about the final. I might touch on the semi-final as well, because obviously that was kind of the semi-final against Alex Lanier was kind of what people saw, and I definitely saw it this way, as kind of like the final before the final, because obviously those 2 players were the top 10 players. Whereas obviously the other semi-final was between Magnus and Calais. Nothing to take from them, but I think they'd both agree that obviously Christie and Lanier are of a slightly higher level currently. But yeah, and that's kind of what we saw in the final. This is the difference between a top 5 player, Jonathan Christie, and a top 50 player, Magnus Johannesson. So we can sometimes see a player of Magnus Johannesson's level defeating a player of Jonathan Christie's level, but that's usually because we see those matches in the first round. And first rounds or early rounds, where players might not be used to the conditions or might not be fully into the tournaments, can be a little bit open to losing to a slightly lower ranked player. This was a final where obviously Jonathan Christie was into the tournament. He had a really tough semi-final, so he was even up to speed. And like I said, and add to the fact that he obviously was playing well and riding high on confidence, it was basically Christie playing close to his best. And when he is a player of Magnus Johannesson's level, simply isn't going to be able to compete at the moment. That's not to say that Magnus hasn't got enough talent and ability to kind of develop certain areas that can maybe get him to challenge Christie a little bit more in situations like this. But if you watch that match, for me, it was just like, this is a top 5 players level, and this is someone who's probably 30 to 50 level. So it was just kind of that. But like I said, I already touched on, it was really good to see Magnus Johannesson reach the final with his comeback from injury, and this will help him. And I also think what will also help him is that final will give him a good idea of what he needs to do to compete with the very best. If he played Christie in a first round and it was a bit closer, yeah, of course, you still learn from every single match you played. But in a final, when you're getting the very best of a top 5 player, it really shows you, really highlights what you need to work on. So I think it's not only really good confidence boost for Magnus to come back and reach the final of a Super 500, but to play against someone like Jonathan Christie firing on all cylinders would give him some really good feedback for his game. For me, obviously, Magnus doesn't have the biggest attack. I think that's always been a weakness of his. I can remember when he made a bit of a splash at Danish Nationals, beating Anders Antonsen. I think Anders and Vittinghus spoke of Magnus on one of their podcast episodes, and even then they were mentioning how technically and football-wise and all the little things he's really, really good at, but he does lack a little bit of overall firepower. And actually, he's very similar to the coach that was behind his court, which was Rune Olsing. He was a short player, but incredibly skillful, really lovely footwork, and a very good player, and did very well on the European circuit, but didn't, and I think he did play in some of the Super Series events as well, but obviously just didn't quite have the firepower, the ability to kind of create attacking and winning opportunities against the very best. He is technically very good. He is quite tactical as well. I spoke about what he did well in the semi-final against Collinen, taking away the net and the way that he approached the overall game. But yeah, of course, can he develop his attack? Of course, I think he's obviously done that over the last few years. His smash and his attacking variation is far better than it was a couple of years ago. But obviously it needs a little bit more. And I think just overall, he just needs to develop everything by probably about 10%, especially defense and how to maintain it under and maintain the control under huge pressure. Obviously, I already said the obvious weakness to Magnus is his overall firepower and his ability to win his own points. So obviously that's something, but usually players of, say, that level, the jump up, usually the hidden gem is in their defensive abilities and being able to, like I said, not just be able to survive in defensive situations, but use those to be able to create other opportunities. And I think for someone like Magnus, who doesn't have a big attack, he needs to obviously be able to get better at that so he can maybe be more of a counter player, someone who could maybe, for example, give an opportunity to his opponent, knowing full well that he can use that against him to pull him out of position and then create the gaps. Because obviously if his defense needs to be strong enough to hold up, but if it also can't create opportunities, etc., then obviously it's going to be difficult for him to win his points against the very best. A bit like what we saw in the final. He couldn't obviously defend particularly well against Jonathan's power and his variation, the flat game. Christie had him beat in every single area. And then obviously when he was trying to attack, he couldn't get through Christie's defense either. So like I said, everything needs to go up by 10%. He definitely doesn't need any more talent or skill. He's got all of that. His racket ability, his technical skills are good. His footwork is smooth. He's obviously got a good brain on him. Usually players that do lack a little bit of power do develop that. And as Antonsen was one I remember him as a kid, he was very, very short, and so he developed good technical and tactical skills, and that's obviously gone in to help him in his later life. Obviously, it has helped that he's sprouted quite tall, but Magnus in a similar thing. But I'm sure someone like Vittinghus in charge, he'll know how to help him develop that even further. So yeah, back to Jonathan Christie. What a fantastic week for him. You know, the final was a little bit one-sided. Obviously, in the semi-final against Alex Lanier, that was, like I said, the final before the final. And he did really well in that one because for a set, I think he was a set and 16-11, 16-10 down, or it was 11-4 at the mid-game interval. So it looked like, and Alex Lanier was playing absolutely brilliant badminton, really attacking, really, really fast, good variation in his attack, and kind of had Jonathan Christie beat in all departments. And then somehow Christie was able to come back. Now, I know that Christie mentioned in an interview that he started to kind of, I think when it was 16-10, he got a couple of points, and then he started to kind of rush to get ready. And it was a way to unsettle his opponent, to kind of show that I'm confident, I'm feeling good, let's get on with this. And I'm not sure whether it did ruffle or unsettle or just kind of put Alex Lanier slightly off, that allowed Christie to kind of get in. But I think Christie wasn't actually generally at that point that confident. It was almost like a front, a bravado, a fake one to kind of do something to try and get himself back in. But it clearly worked because he was able to get himself back in the match, win that. And then in the third game, Christie was flowing like was full of confidence, all the confidence in the world. I do think one other thing that did help him slightly was when Christie did kind of close that gap and make it a little close. I do feel that Alex Lanier went a little bit one-dimensional with his attack. His pace also dropped ever so slightly, but that was because he came out like an absolute rocket. It was never going to be possible for him to maintain that level. But I think that his attacks became a little bit flat, a little bit always fast, a little bit always one pace. And it made me think of the World Championships, actually, when we could hear Kęstutis Navickas, his coach, in the early rounds talk about calming himself down, playing different kind of shots. And I can remember Jill and Steen, I think, with the commentators going, you know, kind of, that's all well and good, but it's winning, it's working. But clearly Kęstutis, that's something that he's seen in Alex, that he needs to be able to. He's got all the physical prowess in the world. He's a great physical athlete. He's got loads of shots, and he is a clever player. He's not just all physical. But sometimes I think, obviously, the physical can take over, especially in these moments where he's kind of too amped up on energy. So maybe maybe that situation made me think of that as something for Alex to develop. I know that I spoke to Kęstutis once, and he said that variety in attack is something that he's been really working hard on with Alex, and it's definitely there. But obviously, there's a difference between being able to do it in practice and in lower level matches, or when you're miles up, or when you're feeling good. But when, like, say, an opponent's coming back and it's in quite a big semi-final, can you produce it then? And I think we've seen Alex, when he's lost in certain situations, sometimes that's been partly the reason. So, but again, fair play to Jonathan Christie. Whatever it was that he changed there in that second game and then the third, and then he carried that into the final, it was just like really, really impressive. And obviously he's been playing really, really good badminton. So congratulations to him. I'm sure his Indonesian fans, actually the Indonesian fans will be really, really pleased, because obviously they had lost the previous two finals they were in earlier on finals day. So for Christie to kind of go, nope, we're going to get one title for Indonesia. Absolutely brilliant stuff. I want to talk about the two Danish players, or three Danish players, I guess you could call it. I've called this section Danish Delight because we did see three Danish players atop the podium at the end of this Hylo Open. Obviously, we had Mia Blichfeld in the women's singles and Mathias Christiansen and Alexandra Boje in the mixed doubles. So I'm going to start with Mia Blichfeld. It has been an absolutely amazing month for her, starting actually at the BXL, which I was a part of, but Mia was the only singles player at that event that won every single one of her matches. It was a sublime performance, and actually what made it even more impressive, I guess you could say, is that she actually got unwell. I'm not sure if it was food poisoning or she just got a little bit sick. She said that it does happen to her a few times when going to Asia. I think she got it on like the second day or something, so the second two wins of hers at that event, she did so being unwell. Then straight after, because her team, the Rockets, got to the final, she flew right after she played. she pretty much left and went to the airport and flew straight to Finland to play there. And she did really well. She obviously got to the quarterfinals, but did withdraw in that quarterfinals against Yamaguchi. And that was because, I think it was because of the illness. Like, she hadn't fully recovered. Obviously, she recovered enough to play. But obviously against Yamaguchi, it just, I think the culmination of the travel and everything. Obviously, Yamaguchi won that tournament. She was obviously playing really, really well. So I think that was just a bit too much. Then she went to Denmark, where she beat Chen Yufei, the former Olympic champion, and reached the quarterfinals. At the French Open, she got to the second round and was beaten comfortably by An Seong, but that's understandable. And obviously here at the Hylo Open, she won the title. So yeah, it's been a brilliant 5 tournaments in a row for Mia Blichfeld. And actually, it kind of goes against what I said about players not playing all 4 and doing well, the scheduling. Obviously, for Mia, playing more tournaments, or especially in this case, I'm not saying this would always be the case, but obviously it's done her good. But I think the other thing that's done her good is obviously, I can't quite remember when she left the Danish national setup, but she's gone independent to train down in the south of France with her boyfriend, Thomas Junior Popov, his brother, Christo, and obviously their father. And I think that's obviously been a really good change for her. I did speak to her briefly when I was in Jakarta, and obviously she said the setup or the coaching and training with the boys instead of with girls, I think, has obviously been a massive thing. So maybe it's the slightly hotter, nicer weather. Maybe it's being with her boyfriend. Maybe it's more focus on her, because I can imagine, like, obviously she's one of the top in Denmark. She would have had a lot of focus on her, but it would still been spread a bit. Obviously now it would be obviously spread between 3 players, but it's a lot more like when it comes to her training, a lot more everything that she does is purely for her. So it's going to focus on her and her needs. It's probably a combination of all 3 of those things. And I definitely think watching her, when I watched her at BXL and I've watched her play in obviously the last, across this European leg, that she definitely looks fitter and faster than before. And I think obviously a big factor in that is probably the fact that she is training with 2 guys now. And so that will, if you're a female player and you can train with men, I'm not saying you need to train exclusively, because obviously they play different shots, etc. But obviously the speed, the intensity, all that kind of stuff is going to be way up. So I think the way that she's playing is almost like a Carolina Marin approach, of very direct and very fast. Although I do think Mia has a little bit more natural skill than Carolina. Carolina's Marin was a very kind of technically taught player. You can see that a lot of her skills and stuff, she's like done it like repetitive. It's not like something, I don't think she was naturally like really, really gifted. You know, a natural gifted player. I don't have time to explain what I mean by that, but Mia's obviously a little bit more of a slightly nicer technique to watch. Obviously, she hasn't achieved what Carolina has. And in the final, when she played Wardani, it was a bit of an odd match, because it was clearly the ends favoured the players. I think in the first game, Mia Blichfeld came out obviously incredibly fast, like I said, very direct, and Wardani was a little bit struck by it. Then changed ends, she was a little bit more prepared. And then I think in the third, I don't think much changed really. I think Mia had a slightly better end and just got a really good start, opened up a huge lead, and then Wardani did actually close it a little bit, but it was just too big and she wasn't able to keep her errors down enough. And I think Mia also knew that I've only got to win 10 points from this end, I don't have to win a full game. And so she was just able to kind of get a few key points, keep that lead, and just kind of see it through to the end. So yeah, really good win for Mia Blichfeld. It'd be interesting to see, obviously, how Mia Blichfeld takes this forward into the next run of tournaments. I'm not sure if she's playing Kumamoto in Australia. I would probably assume she is. I haven't checked. But yeah, no, it doesn't really, if she doesn't, then that's fine. If she can maintain this kind of confidence and build on this, she has got, like I said, great skills. She's tall, she's athletic. She definitely looks fitter and faster than I've ever seen her, and more confident. And when you got those things, and she's always had ability, and she's a fiery competitor. I know that sometimes spills over, and some people will probably even say that in the comment section. Then you're going to get good results. So moving on, Mathias Christiansen and Alexandra Boje, they won the mixed doubles, and it's been quite the comeback for them. Obviously, Mathias was banned for 18 months at the beginning of last year, I believe, because for not informing the doping agency of his whereabouts 3 times. I think that's kind of the simplest way I can put it. But regardless, he was banned. They were going to be going to the Paris Olympics. But obviously that no longer was able to happen. Alexandra Boje, in the meantime, created a partnership with Robin Tabeling, the Dutch player. They did pretty well. They won the German Open, I think earlier this year, actually. So that kind of kept Alexandra's eye in. And when they returned at the Macau Open. I think it was in July. I think that was a Super 300, and they won that. It was obviously a fantastic return. It was clear that Mathias Christiansen had been training obviously really hard in his time off, and was probably very eager to make amends for his fuck up, I guess you could call it. Obviously, from the Macau Open, they went to the World Championships, where I think they got to the third round or fourth round, maybe in the quarters. But they did beat the world number twos, one of the favourites for the event, Feng Yanze and Wang Dongping. Then they played in Indonesia 100, and they won that. They did play, I think, a tournament in Vietnam where they lost in the second round. But after that, they went to the Korean Open, reached the semi-finals there. And then obviously they were both at the BXL event, where I spoke quite a lot to Mathias Christiansen. At the media day, actually, they got notification that they'd made it from the reserve list to the Denmark Open, and they were obviously really happy. They'd been on the reserve list, so like reserve 1 or 2 for a while, but obviously people withdrew, and obviously not only were they ecstatic to be obviously being able to play in a Super 750, where they knew they can rack up some good points, but obviously being in Denmark, their home country, they were especially excited for that, and they did really well. They almost beat the world number ones, Zhang Zhengbang and Wei Yaxin, in the quarterfinals, but the quarterfinals was a great result. And then at the French, they beat the pair, the world number ones, and they reached the semi-finals, where they went to 3 with Dichapon and Super Sara. And now at the Hylo Open, they won. So I think based on all of that, they are now going to, when the rankings get updated, probably by the time this video is out, but tomorrow, because I'm filming this on Monday, they will be world number 18. So you can definitely say that they're back. Like I've already said, based on what I've seen of them, it's clear that they were both obviously missing. They're obviously boyfriend and girlfriend, so they missed playing with each other. But Mathias Christiansen's clearly spent his time away going, right, I'm going to train extra hard. He looks like he's gained a bit of power. He's definitely moving around the court far better. His coverage of the court has definitely gone up. It's never like it was ever a weakness. He was always someone that can hurl himself around a court, but it looks like he's able to do it and maintain pressure when he's doing it far better. His ability to move laterally around the court has got far better. Obviously, Alexandra Boje playing tournaments, Robin Tabeling kept her eye in, kept her sharpness at the front. And I think one big area they definitely look really strong in is their defense. And actually, talking of the defense, I actually think that was the key deciding factor in the final against the French pair of Tom Jekyll and Delphine Delroux. That final obviously was kind of a battle of the two top pairs in Europe. We could see that as the final of the next European Championships. That would be definitely, I would love to see that. They're two exciting pairs that play somewhat similarly. I thought before that final it was going to be a battle of who can push up the court the most and who could also kind of survive those situations and maybe find solutions to get away from that. But yeah, both pairs like to kind of move up side to side at the front. A kind of classic mixed doubles or the European approach to mixed doubles. So like I said, defense for me was key, and that was because the first game was very close. It was a bit nip and tuck. And in the second, it was kind of close until the midpoint, and then the Danes pulled away with it. And for me, their defense was super solid. And I think what that started to do was we started to see gaps appear on the French side. I think Tom Jekyll started to kind of, I don't know whether he got a little bit too desperate, might be the way to put it, or he was trying too hard. He was kind of moving across and there was gaps being left. There was a number of times where they were attacking and the Danish defence was able to kind of ping it into the corners. We actually saw, I saw the Thai pair that played the French in the semi-finals did kind of the same thing. And actually, I can remember after that match finished thinking, the Thai pair probably should have won that. And I think they just let a few too many errors go. I think if they'd been a little bit more solid, the way they tactically had the game won, but the French pair were able to win through other means. But in the final, the Danish pair didn't let anything relinquish. And like I said, the defense was super solid and they were starting to kind of open more gaps. What a great period for all three of those Danish players, for Mia Blichfeld, Mathias Christiansen and Alexandra Boje. And yeah, no, I think with all three of those, I'm quite interested to see how far up they can push themselves up the ranking, playing the way they are. Definitely top 10 is possible for both of them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I'm going to move on. I've got one last thing before I get to the Q&A. And it's something that's, again, not that I want to end on a negative, because I will end on a positive in the Q&A, but I'm going to end the main section, sadly, on a bit of a negative. Okay, so I think you have to... I said right at the start, there were two elephants in the room. With one of those being the scheduling, and the other one being the Victor courts being slippery again. So in the early rounds especially, but we saw this throughout. I noticed this when I first watched Christo Popov in his first round against Lakshya. Both players were slipping. I saw one particular incident with Christo where he did one of those slips where your foot slides forward. I've seen many an Achilles go in that situation. Fortunately, he wasn't injured in that way. He was able to continue, but you could see it did affect him slightly. But I also saw it on the day before when Ben Lane and Sean Vendy played against the eventual winners, actually, Wang Chi Lin and Che Si. Well, I can't remember his name, but Che. So obviously, you know, they were slipping around, and that match, the doubles match, actually caught the eye of Kim Astrup, who put onto his story something about BWF needs to do something about these courts because it's only a matter of time before someone seriously gets injured. Thankfully, no one did, but there was still, throughout the week, every match I watched, someone slipped or another. And actually, I think I was watching Jonathan Christie and a number of other singles players, but especially Christie. Every time in defense, you can see his foot like wobble. It's like as he goes to split and push, because when you obviously like defend or when you move off, you kind of drop your feet and you kind of push the court away. It's like you kind of like doing like a skating move, drop down, push, drop down, push, drop down, push. And every time you could see Christie just being a little bit unstable, but his legs are so strong and he's so sturdy that he's obviously able to kind of correct that. But still, I noticed a number of slippings from players. And obviously it just gets me kind of questioning is, why isn't BWF doing something about this? I'm speaking to Victor, like the brand Victor, because it's always the Victor courts. I think their matted courts are a little smoother in comparison to the Onyx ones, so they're a little bit more forgiving if you're kind of diving or scraping. But obviously you do sacrifice a little bit of grip for that. So I'm surprised that BWF hasn't got some regulations around what's required for, like, I don't know how you would term it, what the term would be, but grippiness of a court or safety, because, you know, it's been an issue for a while. I remember when it first kind of came out, well, it's been out longer than this, I'll tell you in a second, but I think it was at the Thomas Cup or something that was held in Thailand, and there were a number of players slipping like absolute crazy on the Victor courts, and people were chalking up to the fact that obviously the humidity in Thailand combined with the courts being a bit smoother was why there was a little bit of moisture on the courts, and that's why players were slipping more. But obviously you can't really claim humidity in the south of Germany in October or late October. And it's definitely not that humid in Germany at this time of year. So obviously that's not a factor. I think it is a little bit smoother. And I think this has been an issue with Victor courts, even when I played. I played at obviously a slightly lower level, but I can remember going to tournaments like one in Austria where it was played on the Victor courts, or in Croatia, actually. There was one tournament, I might even have a video of it, of Croatia, and I got to the quarterfinals, and the court I played on, it was an honest ice rink, and that was a Victor court, very smooth, and I know the courts they're using at the Hylo Open would be of a higher quality than the ones I played at. They looked a bit old, a bit ragged, but still, it's been an issue with Victor courts for a long time, and I do think, I don't know whether BWF have the power. They certainly should do. If they don't, they have obviously regulations about what organisers, or they're definitely getting this when they change in 2027, trying to get more power, obviously, of what they expect from organisers in terms of the facilities for the players, for the practice courts, for the staff, for the spectators, all these things. There's like a big checklist of what a venue must supply, and I would be very surprised if they don't have that over the quality of the courts, because in badminton, just slightly slipping is just dangerous, because you can see players kind of uncertain to move. Obviously, sudden slips. Badminton is you're going not just left, right, forward, back, but up, down. There's so many change in directions that a little slip like that can cause a major injury, and it can ruin a player's career. players' careers are in their hands in a way. Rubbish shuttles, yeah, it's annoying to watch, but it's not going to injure someone too much unless it's like so slow that your shoulder falls off. But courts, that's something personally that I think, and the fact that this has been an issue for a while, that it's almost become synonymous. Victor courts become synonymous with slipping. Whenever I see Victor, I'm like, we're going to see some slippages this week. The fact that that's kind of happened, I'm surprised Victor themselves aren't trying to kind of do something about it. I don't know if they are, but I do think BDF need to kind of, if they're not already, they need to intervene and go, right, we need your courts to be better, or we simply can't use you as a sponsor. So it'd be interesting. I'm not trying to, yeah. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on that one. It's just, for me, again, I think it's with like a few other things. It seems like it should be a relatively simple solution. Just, I don't know, make the courts grippier. Is it that simple? I don't know. I'll pass over to you anyway. I'm going to move on to the Q&A because there's really not much else I can say about the slippery courts. Okay, so I'm going to carry on from the court one. Do you think having different coloured courts for 500s as well takes away from the novelty of it? So obviously, I think this is because obviously at the All England we've seen grey courts, so it stands out a little bit more. Obviously, the Indonesia Open, they had the blue courts, and obviously here at the Hylo Open we've had the blue courts again. So I think this is what this question has come from, because obviously Indonesia Open was a Super 1000, All England the Super 1000, that I think I might have done an Instagram post where I said, are we going to see different coloured, obviously World Tour Finals are world red courts, but are we going to see different coloured courts at the Super 1000, so it kind of creates that individuality or originality or something that can be quite iconic for the event, something that stands out. So once you turn it on, you see grey courts, even if you don't know anything else, that's the All England, or the red courts, that's the World Tour Finals. It's instantly recognisable. It's great branding. So I think that's why they're asking about, are we seeing different colour courts? For me, I think it's just the fact that Victor are making blue courts now rather than green ones. So I think we might see more when there's a Victor sponsored event. It might be blue, especially if it fits with the colour theme. I think Hylo, the general colour theme was blue as well, so it kind of fitted quite well. Obviously at the BXL, we had the same blue Victor courts as well. Does it take away from the novelty? I'm not sure really now there is supposed to be a novelty. Maybe there needs to be more thought into what colours should be used. Again, I think in 2027, when the World Tour changes, and we're seeing like the 2-week 1000s and more TV stuff and much more control, I think the BDF gaining much more control, maybe we might see them go, right, from the sponsors, we want this coloured court for this event. They might actually try to create that. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Does it take away? I don't really care about the colour courts. I'm not a huge fan of the garish red for the World Tour Finals. I wasn't a fan of the grey at the All England until I actually saw it in person. It does look better live. I do like the idea of different coloured courts for the Super 1000s to make them stand out more, to make them more instantly recognisable. I think that's good for a number of reasons. But I think really the honest answer here is I think the reason it was blue is it fit the colour scheme and that Victor do blue courts. That's simple as. Who would win a match between you and CK Yew? So I don't know why I picked this one to answer. I just thought it was quite funny. And there hasn't been, to be honest, I'm not sure if all of you are feeling the badminton fatigue, but there weren't as many questions given to me this, so I'm a bit selective of the questions. Now, not to sound big-headed, but I would win in a match between me and CK Yew, and I'm sure CK, if he's watching this, would agree. Best way I can describe it is CK did a video on his channel, quite a cool one. I watched it. It was really cool. It was him. He was graded in the badminton system. There's a grading system from A to F, maybe. CK was like an F. Now, I know sometimes some players get graded and then, they're higher than their grade should be. Maybe CK should be a level or two higher. But I think CK is F. I'm A, even still to this day, but I was A. And in that video, I know the guy who was the A player is a guy called Alex Marrett from Yorkshire, very good player. We had quite a few battles, but in main competitions, I never lost to Alex either. So if that kind of puts into perspective, also, CK doesn't even play for the county. Obviously, I played for England. So obviously, the levels are a little bit different. So I think even today, even though I've got a number of injury issues and I don't play very much. I'd still be confident that I could beat CK, but maybe we can get that match sorted. CK, if you're watching this, maybe here's a video idea, me versus you. We can make that showdown happen so we can get a true answer to this question. But I'm sure you don't mind me saying that if there was a match, a hypothetical match between me and you, that I would win. So moving on. Last question. Okay, back to the badminton, back to serious stuff. Can Margot Lambert reach a higher world rank with her new partner, Camille Pognante, than the one she had with Tran? So you all know, with Tran, Margot reached the highest ranking of 13, and they won the European Championships in 2024. They were the first French pair to do so, and they won 4 titles as well, spanning over a few years, over 3 or 4 years together. So can Margot Lambert and Camille, can they get higher than that? It's going to be difficult. I think they can certainly get to a similar level. I think if they were to ever get to top 10, that would be a really good achievement by them. It's going to be really, really difficult. Obviously, winning this tournament here is going to give them huge confidence. Obviously, they've had a really good start as well as a pair. They've obviously won the Hylo Open, but they did win a bronze medal at the European Championships, their first Europeans together earlier this year. And they've also won 3 titles alone this year, and I think actually including the Hylo, I think it's actually 4. So no, it is 3. Sorry, they won like Estonia and something else. I did actually have a little look. Now, in terms of their capabilities, I'll be honest, I haven't watched enough of them, or actually enough of Lambert with Tran to pass like a really detailed opinion. However, I was pretty impressed by the way they played at the Hylo Open. In the final, for me, when they played against the Taipei pair, they were far more organised and they had a much clearer game plan of how to play for each other. They were able to link up well, whereas I felt like the Taipei pair, although probably similar on skill level, maybe a fraction faster than the French pair, they weren't really working as a unit as well as the French pair were. They were kind of just playing badminton. It was hard to kind of see what they were trying to do. They were almost just playing the shuttle over and relying on their skills rather than how do they put those skills together, whereas I felt the French pair did that. I think also on defence, the Taipei pair were getting the shuttle over. They're good technical skills, but they were just defending, whereas the French were defending with purpose. They were driving through, they were blocking cross-court. They were always looking to create in their defence, and I think the French pair also actually played at a slightly higher level. Said here, an overall skill level, I'd say those two pairs were similar. I think that's why when they played each other for the first time at the Arctic Open, it was really close. I think the French pair might have won 19 in the third. But in this final, the French pair did far more with the shuttle, and that's why it was relatively one-sided. And maybe they came in slightly better prepared. Maybe they did some video analysis a little bit more than the Taipei pair. I can't really comment on that. But they certainly handled the pressure of the situation, because I think in the Arctic it would have been maybe a first round, whereas obviously this is a final. That's completely different how you approach that, different pressures, different kind of, different everything. And I think the French obviously, clearly, because they won, handled that situation better. The last thing I'll say is, obviously, because the question's about whether they can get higher than of world rank 13. Like I said, I'm not quite sure whether they can. They certainly have the capabilities, but it's whether they can actually do it. There's always a difference between being able to and actually doing it. I'd like to see more of this pair, but against some of the better pairs, the faster pairs, or the pairs who do more things with the shuttle, can construct attacking rallies or defend with clear purpose, or pairs who simply apply more pressure. At this tournament, they didn't really face any pair that could do that. In the quarterfinals, they beat the number 1 seeds, the Stoeva sisters. And for me, always a big issue with the Stoeva sisters was that they're very physically strong. They're very consistent, but they're quite basic with their game. They're not so good at linking up with each other or defending with purpose. They're very kind of good hard workers, and they've had a number of great results through that. They are obviously, they're current European champions, actually. So they're the highest ranked pair, I think, from Europe. But when you watch them, there's a lot of lifting of serves. There's a lot of just kind of hitting it over. When they smash, just like a big smash, they're not really linking up. There's not much variation in the attack, all those kind of things. Whereas obviously the pairs that Lambert and Pognante are going to have to beat to get higher in the rankings or to get higher than world rank 13, they're going to do things that's going to expose a number of areas on them and going to kind of really test them. So yeah, we're going to have to obviously see them play against more pairs in the top, top 10, top 20, but the pairs that can do more things, the Korean pairs, the Japanese pairs, the Chinese pairs, how they're going to have to develop, obviously, or they're going to have to kind of be interesting to see them against more of those pairs. And I think if I watched a little bit more and against the pairs that can probably stress them a bit more, put a bit more pressure back, or do the things that they were doing quite well, but back to them, but even better, how they handle that, I think I'll definitely get a better understanding of their potential. But, Lambert's 26, so she's not old. She's going to reach her prime. And Pognante, what is she? She's 21, is she? No, she's 19. She's 19, so she's very, very young, only just come out of juniors. So, she's got buckets of talent and quite a lot of time. And as we know, the French team, the setup there is really, really good. So they've got everything going for them. But the question of, can they get to world rank 13 or higher? Can they beat Lambert and Tran's highest ranking? Yes, I think they can. But I think top 10 might be there. Like getting to top 10 in the world would be like an absolute result for them. But who knows? Only time will tell. Let me know your own thoughts. And on that, everyone, I'm going to finish this video. It's been a really busy, long 4 weeks. I'm quite glad, in all honesty, that there isn't another tournament I have to watch with a really keen eye for this week. Got a couple of weeks break before we get back into it at the Kumamoto Masters and the Australian Open. So yeah, no, I'm really happy, really thankful for this gap. It also allowed me to do some other work. I recorded a video about I tried to start off this new series called Behind the Badminton, where I talk about different amazing matches throughout the years. The first episode, which was on the 97 men's singles world final, was keep coming into issues through copyright and stuff. Recently it got blocked again, so I'm trying to kind of figure ways out from that. But I have filmed a second episode that I've been meaning to edit for a while, but I just haven't had the time because of, obviously, I don't do video making full time, and obviously these tournaments are taking up, obviously, watching and talking about it and editing and making notes. It's just been I haven't really had enough spare time to kind of crack on that, but I will be cracking on with that over the coming weeks. Hopefully get it out before the next run of tournaments. I think if there's anything else, I'm not quite sure. If I think of anything else, and I'll put a community post out there to update you on what's coming next. But yeah, as always, guys, let me know your thoughts. Add your comments below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Add more context. All the usual stuff. I don't profess to know absolutely everything, and I'm quite happy to admit when I'm wrong, or happy to defend myself if I think I am right, or if I think I've made a good point, but I'm not infallible. Of course I'm not. I'm just one person. I hope you enjoy it, guys. Oh, and I hope you've been enjoying the bite-sized breakdowns. I've started doing those where I take little sections from this and release them, because some people obviously don't have the time or can't be bothered. They see videos over an hour, they're like, nah, that's too long, even though I do chapter them, so you could actually just click in and just click through. But I think maybe putting them out as little bite-sized breakdowns, maybe more people might watch certain sections of my videos that you wouldn't usually click on it. So let me know what you think of those as well. If you think it's a good idea, I think it is. It seems to be working pretty well, and I want to continue with it. I'm not doing every single section of every single video, just the ones I think are the most interesting, or the ones I think have the best points involved towards them, or the most interesting. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on absolutely everything. I'm going to take a bit more coffee, and I'm going to sit down and edit this video. And yeah, I'm going to take a little break from watching badminton. And so yeah, until next time, everyone, see you later. Cheers. Oh.